So I think that if you really want to get straight what Russell is getting at here, there are some terminological distinctions that you want to definitely keep in mind and really understand. First one was mentioned, or both were mentioned, but the first one was treated in the first video, and that has to do with the distinction between immediate and mediate. And in the context here, we're talking about knowing things immediately and perhaps knowing them mediately. Immediate means without a mediator. That is, it means direct, without anything between you and the thing. And what Russell is suggesting here is that our only immediate knowledge, when it comes to at least the ordinary world of physical objects, the collection of which he calls matter, that our only immediate knowledge is of our own sense data, that is, not of things, but of the appearances of things. For example, take a look at any, in your surroundings right now, take a look at any ordinary object. I'm looking at a pillow. And describe what you see. Now, we could very well say, well, what I see is a pillow, but what Russell's whole point here is to point out that there's huge assumptions that are made, unproven assumptions are made when we say that we see a pillow. What do you really see? Describe actually what you see. I see colors. I have sensation of black and orange and brown. I see a shape, which is roughly rectangular. I could go on and try to describe all the things that I see. Of course, Russell's whole point is that if I change my perspective, I would see different things. Well, those sensations, what he calls those sense data, sense givens, actually, literally, that's what data means. Givens, or datum is a given, something which is given immediately, directly in experience. That is what I am aware of, or that is what I experience directly or immediately. Now, I did say that I saw a pillow, and I believe I do see a pillow. And Russell is leaving open the possibility that there is really a pillow there, and that we can know it, but he's insisting that we cannot know it immediately. If we know it at all, we know it through what he calls a logical inference from what we immediately know. So I know the pillow, if I know it at all. It's a physical object which is distinct from me, which does not depend upon me, which is something which is external to me. If I know it at all, I know it immediately. That is, mediated by something else, through something else. So this distinction between immediate and mediate is a little bit slightly different from maybe our normal use of these words. But if we think about the use of the word medium, media, things like that, the through, the by means of meaning of those words, then I think it makes a lot of sense. So, of course, the question that he's raising here is whether we can actually know any external object. Now, if you look, and again, I'll give you the page numbers, but the distinction he makes between sense data, sensation, and physical object or matter is very, very important as well. He says, let us give the name of sense data to the things that are immediately known in sensation, such things as colors, sounds, smells, hardnesses, roughnesses, and so on. We shall give the name sensation to the experience of being immediately aware of these things. Thus, whenever we see a color, we have a sensation of the color, but the color itself is a sense datum, not a sensation. The color is that of which we are immediately aware, and the awareness itself is the sensation. It is plain that if we are to know anything about the table, it must be by means of, you see that by means of, mediated by, the sense data, brown color, oblong shape, smoothness, etc., which we associate with the table. But for the reasons which have been given, we cannot say that the table is the sense data, or even that the sense data are directly properties of the table. Thus a problem arises as to the relation of the sense data to the real table, supposing there is such a thing. And that last sentence really sums up the whole point of this opening chapter, which is to raise a certain question about what we know and its relation to external things in the world. So this this distinction between sensation, which is something that is entirely subjective activity that we undergo when we sense. Sensation as the activity, sense datum as the object, that is, what we are aware of in that activity. And then external object, on the other hand, is a very, very important distinction. In sensation, we are directly aware of sense data. But the whole point of this opening chapter is to raise a question about the relation of those sense data to actual things in the world, if there are such things. And that's the big puzzle. That's the major puzzle of at least the opening chapters of this whole book that we'll be reading. And as he says, then two related but distinct questions are then raised. One, is there a real table at all? Two, if so, what sort of object can it be? That is, if all we know immediately about ordinary physical objects are the sense data that are given to us in sensations, then the question arises about how those sensations actually relate to the things that we think that they're sensations of, or how those sense data actually relate to external objects in the world. So you can think of the sensation as the activity, and then, or the knowing or the experiencing that we undergo or do. The sense datum as the thing of which we are aware, and then the question of how that sense datum relates to an external object in the world. In the rest of the chapter, he very briefly refers to a philosopher named Berkeley, who he calls an idealist, who believed that the whole question of matter, of physical objects that are external to our experience and somehow are the things that we know, but they're different from our ideas or sensations. Berkeley dismissed that whole thing and said those things don't exist, and all that exists are ideas. And as we'll see later, Russell is, he takes that argument seriously. He's determined to overcome it and to establish, at least to a high degree of probability, that there are external objects in the world that are matter, that are not ideas, and that our ideas somehow relate to. He also mentions Leibniz, another famous philosopher in the history of philosophy, very briefly, and their attempts to solve these problems, and we'll go back over that later. But he ends the chapter by saying, well, even though I've raised these questions about whether there are any physical objects that correspond to our ideas or our sense data or sensations about them, that he really does think that the most sensible solution to the problem is to say that there are external objects, that it's the most sensible way of solving the problem of accounting for our experience, and thinking of our sense data as signs that somehow relate to the objects that cause those signs. But that's a very sort of brief statement, or collection of statements that he makes, and he really has to make good on that in later chapters, and I think that he tries to, and we'll evaluate, how successful he is. The main thing about this opening chapter, I think, are the subjects that I raised. First of all, the whole idea of appearance versus reality, the whole idea of what we know immediately and what we perhaps know mediately, and this whole distinction between sensation, sense datum, and physical object, and especially the problematic and difficult question of how our sense data may or may not relate to things that are external to us in the world.